Hey lovely creatives, it's Dee here from Artsydee, and in this video I'm answering a question I've been getting ever since I posted my how to trace in Procreate tutorial, which is, how did you actually color in the traced image of the woman with the headphones? Now, I didn't record the full coloring process at this time, and as you can see I'm not quite finished it, but luckily Procreate's time-lapse feature captured the whole thing. So in this video I'm going to walk you through how I filled it in step by step and share the brushes, layer setup and blending techniques I used to bring it to life. And if you haven't seen the original tracing video yet, I'll link that for you below. Okay, so step one is the outline completed. So first up, the traced outline is finished. As you can see, I kept it really clean and simple, and that's where my previous video left off. So the very next step that we're going to do here is we're going to click on our wrench icon. We're going to say canvas, and we're going to choose reference. I've already pre-selected the image that I used as my reference image for this artwork. The reason I do this is because I really like to look at what I am painting to get it realistic, to get it looking accurate, and to color pick the correct colors. Color is often a very difficult area, especially with digital art, because colors on the screen look different to colors when they are printed, etc. So it really is very handy to have your reference image available. And then what you can do is you can hold your finger or your pencil down on the color that you want, and this is called the color picker, and voila, there it is. It pops up in the top right corner, and then you can use that. Well, my layers are closed, but you can use that on your image wherever you need to. Okay, so that's step two. You've got your photo open as a reference image. Okay, then the next step in this process, I'm going to just move this over here. So we have our outline layer on the first layer. The next step in the process would be to then create another layer on top of that. As you can see, I've got a multitude of layers. Layers are your friend, because what it means is you can always go back to a layer that you were not happy with and rework it, add things, etc. So the first thing I would do is create a new layer, and then I'm going to start coloring into that layer. So for this particular drawing, I went straight for her face. As you can see, I started building up her skin tones. And how I would do this is I would go to my brushes. I quite like using the Pandani brush because it gives you that very painterly effect. And then I would use something like this mid-tone here. I go for a mid to dark tone to start off, like that. And then I painted onto the face with that mid-tone, and then I slowly start building it up. But I first start with my base color. I also start blocking in the areas with this mid-tone, so where the shadows would be and where the highlights possibly could be. And ultimately, I'm just laying down the basic shapes. Another thing I want you to notice is that if you are painting on top of the layer where your line art is quite clearly going to disappear. So often what I do is I then duplicate that line art layer. I create a new line art layer. I drag it to the top of my layers panel so that I can clearly see where my shapes are and where my colors should be, etc. And once I have my base color down, next I'm going to begin color picking lighter tones from the image and start adding variation. You can see here that we've got an almost yellow, very pale yellow tone there, which I grabbed from her forehead over there. And then her cheek is slightly rosy. She's obviously wearing some blush, and so that's more of an orangey pinky color, which I painted on there. As you can see, with my particular style here, I'm not trying to get it looking as though it is a photograph. I want it to have a lovely painterly effect. I want some of the brush marks to be visible. On the right-hand side of the page, there is slightly more purplish brown in the shadow. Then I went ahead and refined the eyes and the nose and the chin. And I did this by subtly layering tones gradually. Then I also used my smudge tool, and I chose my soft watercolor smudger because that works really well. That is in the Artsydee watercolor kit, which I'll also link in the description below if you're interested. But that just blends it beautifully, and you get that, once again, you get that painterly effect. As I mentioned before, it is very important that you work on each element on its own layer. So you can see I've started with the shirt here. The base layer is that very pale pinky purple, and then on top of that I added the shadows, which I'm building up using a darker purple, but it does mean that I can then go and erase part of the shadow without disrupting anything below that. For the hair and the soft curls that you'll see here, I used the ink bleed brush. This gives a lovely soft blended stroke. And I also blocked out a lot of the color just using a standard airbrush. And then for her skin, as I mentioned earlier, I used the Pandani brush. Essentially, switching up your brushes and testing out what works is really a good way to go about this to create the effect that you want. This video is just a general overview of my process. Let me know in the comments if you'd be interested in me taking you through this process and videoing the entire process, and if that would be helpful. And if there's anything you're unclear about, please let me know. Also, if you're unsure what colors to use or you want something cohesive to start with, I've got a set of free Procreate color palettes you can download. I'll pop the link in the description below. These are super handy for digital painting or journaling. So now I'm going to start working on her hand. So on the reference image, I'm going to move it over like so, and we're going to have a look at her hand there. I'm going to drag this new layer beneath the outline layer so I get a good idea of what to be editing there, what to be working on. And I'm going to grab my first color, which is like my mid-tone color that I spoke about earlier. And I'm going to make sure I've got my Pandani brush selected. And I'm going to start building up that color. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how I might fill in a shape. That's just a very basic idea, but you can build it and layer it as you go along. Another very important question linked to that is, or linked to this process of rendering or coloring in a line art or an outline, is what do you do with the outline once you have started coloring? Say, for example, you don't like the idea of having the outline on your image and you want to create a more natural, painterly artwork. What you can do, there's several options. The first option is to go to that line art layer and uncheck the line art layer. So we can go up here and remove it. Obviously, this gives you a very sort of blurred edge and you might lose some of the definition that you had on your line art. Alternatively, you can reselect your line art and then you can create a new layer above it, like so. And you can call that a clipping mask. Make sure it's a clipping mask. You can then isolate the color right next to the line. And then you can simply color over the line art. Might want a more opaque brush for this, so I'm going to go for the syrup brush. So that's one option, building that up. You can go back to your hand layer and just blend that in a little bit more, for example. So that's one way to get rid of that outline. The other way is to select your blending mode. So you can change how the outline affects, or the effect of the outline, depending on how it blends with the layer beneath it. I'm just going to drag this up to the top, just to get a better idea. At the moment it's on lighter, but you could change it to say overlay, and it gives sort of more of a burnt edged look to it and creates a bit of interest. So that's how I filled in my traced outline so far, starting with a mid-tone, working in layers, building up color, and using a mix of brushes for different textures. Let me know if this was helpful, or if you'd like me to create a real-time version of something similar where I walk you through it live. If you want to learn more about coloring and painting in Procreate, you might also enjoy some of my other tutorials on creating watercolor texture overlays, or how to use coloring pages in Procreate. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.